When we first fall for someone, something extraordinary happens, and something dangerous. We don't just see them, we imagine them. Early attraction is as much an act of creativity as it is of connection. We notice a detail, the way they speak, the way they listen, the way they look at us, and from that detail, we begin constructing a narrative. Not consciously, not maliciously, but instinctively. We fill in the gaps. We assume compatibility before it has been tested. We interpret potential as inevitability. We take fragments of information and weave them into a story that feels coherent, exciting, and full of promise. This is projection. Projection is not deception. It is imagination meeting desire. When we project, we are not necessarily lying to ourselves. We are overlaying our longings onto another human being. We are responding not only to who they are, but to what they represent. The question is not whether projection happens. It always does. The question is whether we recognize it. Because there is a subtle but profound difference between loving someone and loving who you believe they could be. In the early stages of romance, ambiguity works in our favor. The less we know, the more space there is for fantasy. And fantasy is intoxicating. It allows us to bypass the ordinary and live in the extraordinary. It makes small interactions feel cinematic. It turns uncertainty into intrigue. But projection thrives in the unknown. The more space there is between reality and imagination, the easier it is to idealize. You might find yourself saying, "They're just guarded, but once they open up, it will be amazing." Or, "They're under a lot of stress right now. When things settle down, they'll show up differently." Or even, "I see so much potential in them." Potential is seductive, but potential is not presence. When you are in love with the idea of someone, you are in relationship with a future version of them, a polished version, a healed version, a more attentive, more available, more aligned version. And that version may exist, but it does not exist now. Real love requires presence. It requires seeing who the person is today, not who they were at their best moment, not who they could become with enough encouragement, not who you hope they are beneath the surface. Who are they consistently? Projection often reveals more about us than about them. It reflects our unmet needs, our unfinished stories, our internal scripts about love. If you long to feel chosen, you may interpret ambiguity as mystery rather than inconsistency. If you crave stability, you may amplify small signs of reliability into proof of permanence. We are not neutral observers in love. We are participants with histories, and those histories shape what we see. The danger of projection is not that it makes us naive. It is that it delays clarity. When reality eventually interrupts the fantasy, and it always does, we feel betrayed. But often, what we are grieving is not the person. It is the collapse of the story we built around them. We say, "They've changed." But sometimes, they haven't changed at all. We are simply seeing them more clearly. To love someone genuinely, we must be willing to exchange illusion for information. This requires curiosity. Instead of assuming, we ask. Instead of filling in silence, we observe. Instead of romanticizing inconsistency, we name it. We allow behavior, not hope, to guide our understanding. This does not mean becoming cynical. It means becoming conscious. It means asking yourself uncomfortable questions. If they never change, would I still want this? If this dynamic stayed exactly as it is, would it nourish me? Am I responding to who they are or to what I wish they were? There is humility in these questions, because sometimes we do not want the honest answers. Fantasy feels safer than clarity. Fantasy allows us to delay disappointment. It keeps the dream intact. But love built on projection is fragile. It depends on the other person fulfilling an unwritten script. And when they inevitably diverge from that script, conflict arises. True intimacy begins where projection ends. It begins when you allow someone to be ordinary, flawed, inconsistent, complex, when you stop editing their reality to preserve your dream. And something beautiful happens when you do. Either the connection deepens because you are now loving a real person, or it dissolves because the fantasy was carrying more weight than the truth. Both outcomes are honest. The courage to see clearly is an act of self-respect. It protects you from building emotional investments on imagined foundations. It invites you into relationships that are chosen consciously rather than constructed unconsciously. So the next time you feel that rush, that certainty, that intensity, pause gently. Ask yourself, what do I actually know about this person? What have they shown me consistently? Where might I be filling in blanks? Because love does not require blindness. It requires vision. And when you learn to distinguish between who someone is and who you hope they will become, you move from infatuation into discernment. Projection is the spark, but presence is the fire that lasts. And if you want love that endures, you must be brave enough to see, not just imagine, the person standing in front of you. If projection is the psychological layer of early love, chemistry is the biological one. And chemistry can be overwhelming. When you meet someone and feel that electric pull, the anticipation before a message, the heightened awareness of their presence, the way ordinary moments suddenly feel charged, it is tempting to interpret that intensity as destiny, as proof, as something rare and unquestionable. But intensity is not the same as intimacy. In the early stages of attraction, your brain is flooded with neurochemicals designed to focus your attention. Dopamine increases, amplifying motivation and reward. Norepinephrine sharpens alertness. Serotonin levels fluctuate, which is why new love can feel slightly obsessive. You think about them constantly, replay conversations, analyze tone, anticipate contact. This is not poetry, it is physiology. Your brain is essentially prioritizing this person as significant. And there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, this biochemical cascade is part of how bonds begin. It heightens engagement. It encourages risk. It pulls you toward connection. But here is where we must become discerning. The body's excitement can feel identical to emotional compatibility. And they are not the same. Chemistry is immediate. Compatibility is revealed over time. Chemistry thrives on novelty. Compatibility is tested by repetition. Chemistry often intensifies in uncertainty, when you are not quite sure where you stand. Compatibility strengthens through clarity when both people show up consistently. This is why some of the most intoxicating connections can also be the most destabilizing. If someone is intermittently available, warm one day, distant the next, the unpredictability itself can increase dopamine. The brain is wired to chase variable rewards, so the inconsistency feels magnetic. You may interpret that pull as passion, but sometimes it is simply reinforcement psychology. Intensity can mimic depth. We confuse the emotional high with emotional safety. True intimacy, however, is quieter. It unfolds through small disclosures, repeated reliability, shared vulnerability. It requires seeing how someone handles stress, disagreement, boredom. It asks, do we repair well? Do we listen? Do we respect each other's boundaries? These questions are not answered in the first rush. They are answered in the ordinary. Infatuation tends to amplify the extraordinary. You feel alive, desired, chosen. There is an almost cinematic quality to it. But cinema is edited. Real relationships are not. And this is where many people misinterpret the shift that inevitably comes. The neurochemical intensity of early attraction cannot remain at peak levels indefinitely. The brain adapts. The dopamine surge stabilizes. What once felt urgent becomes familiar. For some, this stabilization feels like loss. The spark is fading, they say. Maybe it wasn't real, but perhaps what is fading is not love. It is infatuation. Infatuation is fueled by anticipation. Love is sustained by integration. When the nervous system calms down, you are finally able to see more clearly. Without the constant adrenaline of early pursuit, you can evaluate the relationship with less distortion. Do you feel safe expressing disagreement? Do you respect each other's values? Is there emotional generosity, not just attraction? These are the markers of intimacy, and intimacy is built slowly. It requires the tolerance of familiarity, the willingness to see someone repeatedly, not as a thrilling mystery, but as a complex human being. It involves choosing them not because your heart is racing, but because your life aligns. This does not mean chemistry is irrelevant. Desire matters. Attraction matters. But chemistry without compatibility is like fuel without structure. It burns bright and then collapses. There is also another layer here. Sometimes, what we label as chemistry is actually recognition of a familiar emotional pattern. If you grew up equating love with unpredictability, you may feel most drawn to someone who triggers that same anxiety. The intensity feels like home. The emotional roller coaster feels alive. But familiarity is not always health. It takes maturity to pause and ask, is this connection nourishing me or activating me? There is a difference. Nourishment brings steadiness, expansion, and self-respect. Activation can bring obsession, urgency, and self-doubt. Both feel intense. Only one builds something sustainable. So when you find yourself swept up in chemistry, resist the urge to declare permanence. Instead, become curious. Let the intensity exist. Enjoy it. But do not let it decide for you. Observe how the person shows up when the novelty softens. Notice whether kindness remains, whether curiosity persists, whether effort is mutual. Because real love is not proven by how high you can feel together. It is proven by how grounded you can remain together. The transition from infatuation to intimacy is not dramatic. It is subtle. The butterflies become steadier. The conversations deepen. The urgency fades, replaced by presence. And if you can stay through that shift, without chasing constant adrenaline, you may discover something far more powerful than chemistry. You may discover compatibility. So before you call it love, ask yourself, is this just the rush of being chosen? Or is this the quiet beginning of being understood? Intensity can start a story, but intimacy is what sustains it. And if you want love that lasts, you must learn to distinguish the spark from the foundation and choose the foundation every time. So if projection distorts our vision and chemistry amplifies our emotions and identity quietly attaches itself to the story of us, what does real love actually require? It requires choice, not the dramatic cinematic kind, not the impulsive declaration fueled by adrenaline, but the steady, conscious decision to see clearly and stay. Mature love begins where illusion ends. At some point, the fantasy softens. The neurochemical rush stabilizes. The image you constructed collides with the reality of who this person actually is. Their limitations become visible. Their habits become repetitive. Their wounds surface. And yours do too. This is the moment of truth. Many relationships end here. Not because love was absent, but because it was built on intensity rather than intention. When the high fades, people interpret it as incompatibility. When differences emerge, they interpret them as mistakes. But what if this moment is not the end of love, but the beginning of it? Real love is not the absence of disillusionment. It is the decision to remain curious after it. When you shift from fantasy to reality, something powerful happens. You stop asking, do they complete me, and start asking, can we build something honest together? Choice enters the picture, and choice is quieter than infatuation. It looks like showing up even when you're irritated. It looks like having difficult conversations rather than withdrawing into resentment. It looks like recognizing your partner's humanity, not just their highlights. Love as fantasy says, you are everything I hoped for. Love as choice says, I see you fully, and I'm still here. There is profound strength in that, because choosing someone does not mean ignoring incompatibility. It does not mean tolerating disrespect or compromising your core values. In fact, clarity becomes sharper in mature love. You are no longer blinded by projection or intoxicated by chemistry. You are evaluating. Does this person take responsibility for their behavior? Can we repair after conflict? Do our visions for the future align? Is there mutual effort? Choice is not passive, it is discerning. And here is the paradox. When love becomes a conscious choice rather than an unconscious reaction, it often deepens. Because it is no longer driven by fear of losing the fantasy, it is driven by commitment to reality. There is something incredibly intimate about being chosen after being seen clearly, not idealized, not pedestalized, seen. When two people reach that point, where illusions have dissolved and yet they remain invested, the relationship shifts into something steadier. Less dramatic, perhaps, but more durable. It becomes collaborative. Instead of asking, do you make me feel high? You begin asking, can we navigate life together? And life will test you. There will be stress, fatigue, disappointment, external pressures, internal insecurities. At those moments, Fantasy offers no protection, only commitment does. Commitment is not a prison, it is a practice. It is the daily act of choosing alignment over ego, repair over pride, understanding over assumption. This does not mean tolerating harm. It means engaging with complexity. Real love allows room for disappointment without collapsing into despair. It allows room for imperfection without withdrawing affection. And perhaps most importantly, it allows both partners to remain individuals. Fantasy often seeks fusion. We are one. But conscious love respects differentiation. We are two, choosing to build a third space together. That third space, the relationship, is not sustained by intensity. It is sustained by effort. And effort is not romanticized enough. We glorify the spark, but we rarely celebrate the patience required to maintain warmth. Choosing someone again and again, especially after you have seen their flaws, is not settling. It is depth. It means you are no longer chasing the idea of love. You are participating in it. There is also humility in this stage. You recognize that you too are imperfect, that someone is choosing you despite your blind spots, your moods, your inconsistencies. This mutual acceptance creates security, not the fragile security of, I hope this never changes, but the grounded security of, we can handle change together. So how do you know you have moved from illusion to conscious commitment? The relationship feels calmer, not boring, calm. You feel more yourself, not less. Conflict does not threaten the entire bond. You do not need constant validation to feel stable, and you are not clinging to who they could become. You are engaging with who they are. This is love without anesthesia. Clear, intentional, earned. It may not feel as intoxicating as the beginning, but it feels real. And real love has weight. So before you declare yourself in love, ask one final question. If the fantasy disappeared tomorrow, if the intensity leveled, if the image cracked, would I still choose this person? Because love that depends on illusion will always be fragile. But love that survives clarity becomes powerful. Do not aim for the highest high. Aim for the clearest yes. Because being in love with the idea is easy. Choosing a real person in real life with real effort, that is love. The relationship becomes more than connection. It becomes a solution. When love turns into a solution, clarity fades. You may ignore incompatibilities because the relationship fulfills an identity need. You may tolerate emotional distance because externally everything looks right. You may cling not because the dynamic is healthy, but because losing it would destabilize how you see yourself. This is where the idea of love becomes powerful, the idea of being partnered, the idea of being admired, the idea of having found the one, the idea of not starting over. The person becomes intertwined with the narrative, and narratives are harder to let go of than people. If the relationship supports a specific story, I am finally secure, I am no longer alone, I am someone who is chosen, then ending it feels like erasing that identity. It feels existential, so we stay. Not necessarily because we are deeply fulfilled, but because the alternative feels like regression. There is also a social layer to this. Relationships are visible markers. They are announced, celebrated, photographed. Being in one can feel like belonging to a club of adulthood, of success, of stability. Leaving one can feel like stepping backward, even if internally you know something is misaligned. So we must ask ourselves gently but honestly, if no one else were watching, would I still want this? If this relationship were invisible, no social validation, no symbolic status, would it still feel nourishing? This is not about cynicism. It is about disentangling love from ego. Real love enhances your identity. It does not replace it. When you are in love with the idea, the relationship becomes central to your self-worth. Your mood depends heavily on their attention. Your sense of value fluctuates with their availability. Their approval becomes disproportionately significant. But when you are in love with the person and grounded in yourself, the relationship is important, but not consuming. You feel expanded, not defined. There is a subtle difference between saying, I love who I am with you, and I only feel valuable when I am with you. One reflects partnership, the other reflects dependence. Sometimes, what feels like deep attachment is actually fear of losing the role the relationship gives you, the role of being needed, or admired, or rescued. And here is the uncomfortable truth. If the relationship is carrying your identity, it cannot carry true intimacy. Because intimacy requires two differentiated selves choosing each other, not two people using each other to stabilize their insecurities. This is where self-awareness becomes radical. You might ask yourself, what does this relationship allow me to avoid? Loneliness, uncertainty, self-doubt, growth, and also, who am I when I am not in this relationship? Do I recognize myself? Do I respect myself? Sometimes stepping back, even briefly, reveals whether the bond is mutual nourishment or mutual reassurance. Love should not feel like a performance you must maintain to keep your place. It should not feel like a role you are afraid to lose. When you are in love with the idea, you protect the image at all costs. When you are in love with the person, you protect the connection, which sometimes means confronting difficult truths. It is far easier to stay in a beautiful narrative than to disrupt it with honesty. But mature love demands honesty, not only about them, but about you. Are you staying because this person genuinely aligns with your values, your vision, your emotional needs? Or because this relationship helps you feel like someone you are afraid to lose? The courage to ask these questions does not weaken love, it refines it. Because when you choose someone not for what they symbolize, but for who they actually are, and when you remain in a relationship not because it defines you, but because it deepens you, something shifts. Love becomes less about validation and more about growth. And growth is not always comfortable. It may require releasing the idea to protect the reality. So before you say, I can't imagine my life without them, pause and ask, can I imagine myself fully without the role this relationship gives me? Because real love does not erase you, it reveals you. And if you want a relationship that sustains you, you must be willing to separate the dream of who you are inside it from the truth of how it actually feels. Love that strengthens your identity is powerful. Love that replaces it is fragile. Choose the one that allows you to remain fully yourself and fully connected at the same time.